Hey babes, welcome back. Laura here with episode 8 of the BJJ Babes podcast. This week, we're diving into a topic near and dear to my heart, mental health. I've told you all before, I have anxiety, and I've been through things in my life that have left me depressed, extremely anxious, and at times having panic attacks. When I'm in that state, I tend to ruminate and overthink. And while it's good to deal with your thoughts and emotions, sometimes, at least for me, the more I ruminate, the worse it gets. And I just need to turn off the thoughts. That's where jiu-jitsu helps my mental health. It's something that forces me to stop my worst thoughts from spiraling. But at the same time, jiu-jitsu can also affect my mental health in a negative way. Like when I put too much pressure on myself to perform or achieve and then get frustrated when I don't feel like I'm where I want to be. So it really does both for me. And that's why I'm happy to introduce this week's guest, Erin Herle. Erin has her black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's competed at the highest levels. To just highlight a few, she's an IBJJF Asian Open champion, an IBJJF South American champion, an IBJJF World No-Gi champion, an IBJJF European Open champion, among other achievements. Erin's also an advocate for removing the stigma for mental health. She founded the Submit the Stigma movement in 2015, and she's currently a mental performance coach for athletes with her business, Train Ya Mind. Yeah, like YA. I found Submit the Stigma at a time when my anxiety was flaring up, as it does. And I'd shared as much with someone who didn't really handle it well, which honestly just made it worse. And I found the Submit the Stigma Instagram, and seeing that slogan so prominently really spoke to me. And it still does, because fuck the stigma around mental health. Like, fuck it so hard. Being afraid about talking about it only makes people afraid to get help, and it doesn't make it go away. And then we all have to be in a world full of people with untreated depression, anxiety, you name it. And I've heard the terms, hurt people hurt people. Or, as one of my friends like to say, if you don't fix what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. Either way, it's not good for any of us. We all need to take care of ourselves and start talking about our mental health. You can tell I am a bit passionate about this topic. So let's talk about it. Here's my chat with Erin. Hey everyone, we're here with Erin Herle. Erin, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely.
Hey, so Erin, could you just take a few moments to introduce yourself, how you got into jiu-jitsu, what your journey's been like?
Yeah, so I found jiu-jitsu in 2009. So I was about 19, 20, and I was looking for something to do. I really only went to like hardcore shows, but like didn't really have an identity and just would just hang out, man, you know. I didn't know what I wanted to do with a career. And then I found jiu-jitsu through the hardcore music scene. And so a guy that I had been going to shows with was like, yeah, I started training jiu-jitsu and it's this and it's that. And I'm like, that sounds like roughhousing that I used to do like with my guy friends in high school and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I'll try it. Like I was the only female for a very long time. I would seek out female training partners. And then I started competing about 3 months in. So for me, it was like, this is really cool. This is like an outlet that I wouldn't normally have had. I definitely had lots of anger pent up, I think, you know? So it's like, for me, it was like training was just this big release, and I never worked out. I was never an athlete, never did sports. It was like the only sport that I actually started. So I didn't have that athletic identity. But for me, just like the camaraderie, like it's awkward, right? Like it's fun. There's a lot of humor. It's weird. It's, you know, like you're rolling around with strangers, like all sweaty, you know? So it's just kind of funny to me that I found it and then I latched onto it. And then here I am 15 years later. And I've made it my life, basically. Like, I think it is the reason that I've pursued the things I've pursued, even outside of the mats. I competed at the highest level, kind of coming up the ranks, and I trained at all the biggest academies, and I dedicated my life to it. I was like, I'll just work Craigslist jobs and just sort of get by. And then I started working for Gracie Mag, and I did interviews. I was just like you. I would literally just Facebook message people and be like, hey, do you want to do this interview? You know? So I started that like a long time ago, and I was really interested in the psyche and the mind of these athletes and what made them so good, mostly at that time, just so that I could try and copy it, right? Because I wanted to be the guy that's like, I win a world title. I want to be a world champion. And so that was kind of my pursuit. I did the journalism thing for a while. Then I started teaching jujitsu and doing seminars around the world. I just kind of would organize them by myself. So that was always fun to just be like, hey, I'm going to be in this area. Can I do a seminar? And so I kind of learned that jujitsu for me was a very, like, I guess, entrepreneurial pursuit, right? Because you don't really, there's no professional level necessarily, especially not back then. So there wasn't any paid gigs. So you really had to find a way. You were either teaching, or maybe you got paid by sponsors if you won everything, but that was about it. So for me, it was just dedicated to finding ways to make money through jujitsu while doing jujitsu while competing jujitsu. So it was a lot that I had on my plate, but I would say like 2019, around that time was when 2018, I think, really, when I got my black belt in 2017 from Cobrinha, Rubens Charles Cobrinha. And then I went to MMA. So I started that and I did that for a little bit and I learned striking and whatnot. And then once the pandemic hit, I was like, I don't really want CTE. And I decided to like really use my brain instead. So I went to get my master's in sport and performance psychology. And now I'm a mental performance consultant. So I'm actually taking my final certification exam, which has taken me 3 years to get to, but I'm taking that 2 days from now. And that'll be like my final. And then I can have the 4 letters next to my name. So
Yay! Well,
it's
good
been a
luck with
long journey.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is an interesting journey, and it's interesting to hear how you were able to parlay your love of sports, jujitsu, and the psyche into this degree and into your work now as a mental performance consultant.
Right. It all kind of blends, right?
Yeah, it sure does. During your jiu-jitsu journey, you also founded a, at the time, nonprofit called Submit the Stigma. What led you to found Submit the Stigma?
So I always kind of considered my jujitsu journey synonymous with like my mental health journey. I had a lot of issues coming up. I was told to get treated for ADD or tested for ADD when I was in kindergarten. Which is crazy because that was back in like 94. So it wasn't even a thing to like, even just to think that it's a female thing, right? Because it was always like a rebellious little boy type of, that's the stigma of ADD. So of course the pediatrician was like, she's just smart. And so I kept going and I had my challenges, but I'm high masking and high functioning. So it was just like, oh, she likes to socialize. And so like, I remember when I started jujitsu, it's like, man, like you're going to confront things. You're going to confront who you can't lie. You're going to have ego issues. You're going to get frustrated. Like, how are you going to deal with being in harmful positions? Like, there's a lot that we have to deal with. So it kind of gave rise to a lot of issues. And I was like, I got to deal with this. It's similar to why I cleaned up my diet. Like I stopped eating like burritos every day because I was farting on everyone. So it's like, I like you change, you change your habits because you're like, well, I want to be able to do jujitsu easier. Like it's already hard. Why am I making this harder on myself by not fueling myself, not hydrating? Right. So it's kind of like you make good decisions. So that was kind of one of my decisions of like, I can empower myself. Like, look at all these beautiful things my body can do, like choking people and breaking arms. Why can't I go do that and be in control of like my psyche, my life, my mental health? So I sought out a therapist. I got diagnosed at 23 with ADHD. And that was a really big turning point, having anxiety, all that stuff. So depression, whatever. So that obviously came up, especially in competition. Losing was the worst, right? Because I'm just like, man, people thought I was going to win and I thought I was going to win and now I didn't do it. And, all the other turmoil. So, Submit the Stigma was kind of like something that came from tragedy also, because I would not have created it unless my dad didn't die. Like, so my dad killed himself, in 2015 and I had a very tumultuous relationship with him. So it was very complicated, but it was still my dad. And the fact that he did it at home, it affected my mom. I was living in New Jersey at the time. My parents were in, Los Angeles. So I flew home and it was me, my mom, and my sister. And we went to like therapy right away, like grief counseling, everything. And I decided, well, I have been someone who posts everything on the internet. And obviously I'm going to post this, but I didn't want it just to be like, hey, feel sad for me. And we weren't looking for, like flowers or anything, but we said, why don't we kind of donate his proceed, whatever, anyone who wants to donate, we could send it to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, because it's something that has a chapter everywhere. It's more discreet, right? Like someone like my dad who didn't want to get help maybe could have gotten help through it. So we ended up raising like $7,000.
Oh, wow.
And it was really powerful, but people came out and shared their stories. And that was the big one. Like suddenly I had like this experience that people were okay with sharing because, oh, you've been through it, or you've been through that, or you've been affected by it. And it always interested me because it wasn't enough for me to talk about my own issues. It wasn't until I had tragedy strike me, quote unquote, that people started paying more attention. And so I ended up making it a campaign, and I decided that it was going to fuel me when I got back to competition. So I got my brown belt. I went to no-gi pans, and I had a sign that I intended to make. I ended up losing my final and going off crying and making the sign, and then I didn't get on the podium. So I was like, damn it, I have to do absolute now. So I got third in absolute by default, lost my first match, but I was like, yes. So I got my platform. And then I held up a sign that just said, submit the stigma of mental illness. And to me, that was like activism. That's like campaigning. That's using my platform for something good, not just social media, but to show that, look at me, I could do it despite struggling. And then people started wanting to carry the sign too when they were by the podium, when they saw it. And a lot of other people, how can I support? And then I made patches. And then it was like, wow, this could really be something. I could really start doing seminars. I could really start advocating and having the NAMI people come in. And, we did this big seminar in San Diego. I had like Hamala Bahal, Clark Gracie, Christina Barlon, Kauteha, everybody like kind of coming out. And for me, that was huge because like 100 people on the mat that came together for like mental health, to say like, I'm okay with talking about it. So that's how everything kind of started. And my goals for it were just to be a hashtag, right? Like something to be shared so that when someone wants to have a vulnerable moment and talk about the things that are bothering them, which is super, super important, sharing your story, as you know, that I wanted that to be at least like a platform or an outlet, because most people weren't going to share that because they're afraid of what people are going to say. But if there was some sort of like, what is the word? Like collaboration or like camaraderie behind it, that was like, okay, cool. Now I have people backing me. This is part of something. And now I'm part of something. It's not me alienating or isolating myself. I'm actually choosing to join a group of people that also feel the way that I feel, and makes me feel less alone.
Yes. And it's just 3 words, but they're such powerful words. Submit the stigma, because the stigma is what keeps people from talking about it. And I think the less people talk about it and the more they feel alone, the less likely they are going to be to get help and to help themselves. And that's not good for any of us, for people to go around this world not dealing with their mental health issues.
Absolutely. I mean, we see things all the time on the mats, right? Like ego, I mean, I have a bad day and I come in and I'm like, I'm going to beat everybody up, and I say that all the time because I like joking. But back in the day, I couldn't actually do that. Nowadays, like I have the skill to do that when I want to. But it was a real frustrating experience. And there's also, belonging. We want to feel accepted, right? I mean, we go in and we're females, and we go into the gym and it's all men, right? And it's like, I don't have they put me in a gi, right? It was like this really cheap judo whatever gi thing, or even like a karate gi. It was crazy, a cheap thing. And I remember looking around not knowing, I couldn't compare to see like, am I wearing it right? Does this look right? Right? Because I was just comparing to men. And something as simple as that, to not see yourself and be like, I don't know, dude, I just going with it. I luckily had guy friends that I already knew to feel comfortable. But for most women that are coming in and seeing all men and choosing to step on the mat anyways is a really brave thing. And so I felt brave doing that, and I think that empowers you to go, wow, if I can show up and I can do this hard thing and I could build bonds with people, I mean, we always say like, don't break your toys, right? Like, don't like, I'm not going to try to break your arm. Even if you're not going to tap, like, I'll protect you kind of thing, especially if you don't know better. Things like that, right? There's camaraderie. And this is something that I used to say at all my seminars is that, check on your friends, not because it doesn't even have to be like that you actually care about them. It could literally be that you just want them to come train because they're a good training partner, whatever it is, right? Like, but that little note that says, hey, I noticed you weren't in training tonight. Everything good. Like, that could mean the world to someone who feels like no one cares, or worse, when they feel like they don't want to burden someone. And so, yeah, the mats aren't a place to just go like and just vent, like you're like drilling arm bars and you're like, and then he broke up with me. And like, yeah, sure. But like, it's not really the place for it. But at the same time, when you are so vulnerable with people and you allow them into your personal space and you allow them to repeatedly do things to kind of hurt you, like put you in harm's way, there's a real big trust there, right? So a lot of camaraderie and stuff is really important for mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you touched on some good points right there with regards to like, the mat is not necessarily the place to vent. I feel like in some ways it can be a place to escape, and I don't mean that in a void, but more, I know when my brain is stuck in like a really bad loop of like intrusive thoughts, I used to think that I could think my way and rationalize my way out of the thought. But
ideally,
actually, your brain is a fucking liar when you're in a fucking liar.
Brain's got a brain, dude.
Yeah, it'll lie to you. And what actually helps, and I learned this through therapy, was sometimes you just have to like literally ignore the thought. And it's counterintuitive, but I think sometimes going on the mat can be an opportunity to not avoid your issues, but step away from them.
Yeah, reprieve for sure. I mean, that was always a hard thing for me because I came up in like more serious training environments because it was like world titles on the line, whatever, I don't know, high level gyms. But it was always like leave your ego off the mat. And I get the sentiment behind it, but if you're telling me to have an intense role and do things right and want to win, I have to have ego. Ego is not like we tend to put things all or nothing. Ego is not bad. Ego can be bad, but ego is just ego. It's going to be there no matter what, right? And also, I used to hate how they'd say, okay, well, just forget everything else. You're not allowed to think of anything else, while you're on the mat. Almost like it wasn't allowed, or that if you brought your negativity, that it would be contagious or something. And so me being non-diagnosed and just being a freaking, I don't even know, like nut job half the time in my own field, it was really hard because then I felt like, oh, like I'm not allowed to be myself, But then I realized later on that it was like, no, we have different hats. And this is something that I tell my clients when I do the pre-performance routines for competition, when they decide like all the things they want to do leading up to the mat side. I mean, you get to choose what you want to do and you get to be in control.
So what does the future look like for Submit the Stigma?
Okay. So we decided to dissolve the nonprofit, which is still in progress, which is because I didn't want to run the nonprofit and it wouldn't make sense to have someone else run it, because as much as I tried to make my name not the center of it, because Valerie Berceau, Rosa Walsh, like they helped me a lot. They helped build the brand. I mean, it was Val and I together. Val is like, she made the Instagram. And then when Val and I both had our own kind of entrepreneurial endeavors, then Rosa stepped in and ran the whole thing. But it was hard to say, this is not something I'm good at. So it was definitely like a vulnerable, humbling moment to say to the board of directors that like, I can't do this. And the thing is also, I never wanted it to be this big franchise business, anything like that. I really just wanted it to be something for people to talk, right? Because that's how we get rid of stigma. We talk about it. And so for me, stepping away so that I can build my own private practice, I was worried about what it would be. But at the same time, I'm still fulfilling the path, which is mental health awareness. And it's big these days. I mean, Simone Biles, right? Even when Kobe was around, he would talk about it. Like there's a lot of Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, they all talk about mental health, and they've all stood up for it since then. I mean, 2016 was when I started Submit the Stigma, but nowadays it's more about sharing the stories on the Instagram and being able to use the hashtag in a way that says, I can speak about this and not feel like I'm going to have consequences. That there is like psychological safety behind being able to say the things that you feel and not feel that you're being a burden to others, not feeling like, oh, you're just asking for attention. I mean, and these are all the things that your brain, your inner critic is going to tell you, right? Like depression, anxiety, they tell you things that aren't true. And they tell you like, oh, no one wants to hear that bullshit. Like, oh, man, you've already called them 3 times crying. Like they don't want to hear you again. Right. And, you know, and then you have like access to care and other things that other people, you know, don't have. And so I wanted it to be resources in the future. I thought, oh, maybe we can say we can have some sort of deal with certain psychologists that instead of recommending yoga, they would recommend jujitsu. Right. And then you could talk to local gyms but it was a lot of idealism, I think. And the practicality of it is that it should just be a hashtag. I mean, you still found it. You still saw it. We're still talking about it. And that's why this gives me hope that it can still go on as it is without having it be something like where I have to run with ambassadors and we have to do blog posts. We have to do all this stuff because those are things that I'm trying to do for my own business. And I'm still helping people the same way I would have, but now in a more like one-on-one setting, you know?
Yeah. And I think that just because something should look a certain way, like, oh, you've got this hashtag and this movement, like, shouldn't that be a nonprofit? Doesn't mean that gets the message out or that it accomplishes the end that you want to accomplish with it.
Right. I mean, there was a time when Val and I were like, we're going to revamp this, we're going to redo it, and we're going to make it big. And then we can have, we can have salary, we can have an executive board, we can have all of these things to do it right. And that way we don't have to say that Submit the Stigma is like some side project if it becomes our job, right? And I even looked into going and get my master's in nonprofit, you know, organizations. And, you know, it was a lot of skills that I didn't have that I wanted to have, but at the same time, I couldn't do it justice. Like I'm not a campaigner. I'm not a fundraiser. Like I chose a life of low income with like jujitsu. Like I dedicated my entire 20s to just like living the jujitsu lifestyle, being like a bum, living with my mom, you know, like it's not something that I value. But I remember one special conversation that there was someone who was like, what would happen if someone said, I love what you're doing. I want to give you 30 grand. What are you going to do with it? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, we could do this, we could do that. But then the logistics, and it was like, wow, I don't know how to do that part. I'm not a spokesperson. I'm not like a politician. I'm not like, I say stupid shit. I have to be very authentic. It's just kind of the unmasking process that I've gone through, and being myself. And that helps people in a way to be their own authentic self. But when you're the executive director and founder of a mental health awareness nonprofit, it just, on paper, it sounds great. But then I'm like, I'm not that person. Like, I'm not that person. So my thing has always been grassroots. So when I told you that I started interviewing people, like this was because I started training with Hamala Bahal. And at the time, like I started training 2009, 2005, he was already a big deal at black belt, like winning everything. So he was already kind of a superstar. I remember someone saying like, you don't realize this, but your coach is actually like the Michael Jordan of jiu-jitsu. And I was like, holy shit, And then when I started going to tournaments, I'm walking around and people are staring at him and people are wanting pictures with him. And I'm the one having to take them. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. Like this is pretty cool. Like this is a cool little world. And if you win stuff, then people think you're cool and stuff. But I realized people wanted to know what the guy ate for breakfast. They wanted to know what his workout routine was. They wanted to know all these things. And I'm like, I have access. So why don't I interview these people that I have access to so that other people can learn, right? And see them as human and all that. So I made a zine and I would go to Staples and I did it in Microsoft Word, and I'd have like a picture and an interview here, interview there. And then I'd go to Staples and I'd print them out and fold them myself. And they were just Xerox copies. And then I was like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. And I started getting like neon colors. And I was like, look at me, it's pink, orange, yellow. It's like, this is sick. I can make all these executive decisions. And then I would, during my full-time travel job, in my cubicle, I would I'd Google like gyms in Nebraska. And then I'd email them and I'd say, hey, I would love to send you some stuff. If you have like a waiting room or like a desk and you could just put these out there, that'd be great. And people were just like, sure. And this was 2010, 11. And that's how I did it. I started using the people around me and their what they eat for breakfast to make people think like that I could provide a service. And then I started a white belt blog called Building a Legacy, because Legacy was the name of my first gym. And there was like this full discretion, like, I don't know anything. I am not claiming to know anything. I am a white belt. But if you want to know what it's like, here we go. And I wrote that all the way until purple belt. So I've always been kind of like an open book. And that's why with Submit the Stigma, it was always, if I share my own experiences, you get someone who's like, oh my God, me too. Right.
Yeah.
Like that connection, it was almost selfish, because as I would share the grieving process and the things because like Submit the Stigma started at the time that my dad died, pretty much like within that month. And so life obviously keeps going. And so as I was dealing with all the various emotions, I would post about them. So I made it like when my dad his ashes were interred. And then when there was like the Suicide Prevention Day, which is today actually, right? Like different benchmarks of my process of grief. And then I could make it, known. And so obviously people were like interested, just because, everybody hears about suicide. And if you haven't been affected by it, you probably will at some point in your life. But, it was interesting to see how does someone manage that? Because nobody wanted to talk about it. In fact, I read a book and I don't even remember the name. And it was about suicide, and it talked about how in history, the reason why we use the word committed is because it was a crime. It was self-murder. And in many cultures, you were not granted a funeral. You didn't get a plot. It was like, how dare you? In France, actually, I think in like the 1400s, if you died by suicide, they would tie up your body behind a cart, like a horse and carriage, and ride through the town, dragging your body throughout, because it was such shame involved. So how do you deal with shame? You talk about it. You normalize it, right? And there's nothing shameful about it. It's like the final straw of depression. And there's no singular reason. There's all these myths about suicide that, oh, if you say the word, like it's a new drug that, oh yeah, I'm going to try suicide. And that's not it. And so I think people were just very like, wow, she's just doing it. Like she's talking about it. So I'm still going to talk about it. I don't really talk about my dad anymore. In fact, there was a time, I think, after a few years, because my dad and I didn't have a great relationship, and there was a lot of like psychological abuse and narcissism and other things, and so that's why it made it so complicated with his death. But because he was like, there were good, amazing parts to him, and there were horrible parts of him. So it was like, I could easily be like, yeah, I'm just going to remember the good things. But as time goes on, you realize, like, you go through something and you're like, why do I feel this way? Oh my God, it's because I felt that way because of this person and whatever. So it got complicated, and I've never really talked about it, but here I am. So I took his story off of the website, because I no longer wanted people to be sad or pity him or honor him. In fact, Val was going to the suicide walk that she goes to every year. And normally she writes my dad's name. And so she asked me, and I was like, you could do it if you want. You know, it's something that you normally do, but it's very complicated. And so to make Submit the Stigma about my dad, I was like, I'm pulling away from it. And I think that's why. So it was always like, oh, your dad. And I'm like, I don't really want to talk about it anymore, you know? So nowadays for Submit the Stigma, I think it's just an opportunity to show vulnerability. And Brene, I don't know if you know Brene Brown, shame researcher.
Yes.
We love Brene Brown.
Her books.
Yes. Imperfection. I forget imperfection something. But there's a lot of books that she's had, but the research she's done is that vulnerability takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. And she talks about it in a way that is so relatable, how vulnerability could be telling someone you love them for the first time. Vulnerability could be tapping to a white belt. It could be, you know, like waiting to hear the possible cancer diagnosis, right? Like people who are vulnerable and don't have a choice, you know? So that's kind of where she's at. And I think that really helps with jiu-jitsu because we are voluntarily putting ourselves into very particular vulnerable positions. And then we're working continuously and struggling and choosing to struggle, even though we struggle without wanting to. This is where we choose our struggle.
And I think there's a vulnerability in just even starting to train in the first place and opening yourself up to getting tapped, getting beat. There's the vulnerability of competing and stepping out on the mat.
And that's why she talks about the man in the arena. Brene Brown does. It's a Theodore Roosevelt quote, you know, it's the man in the arena, not that counts. You know, whose face is scarred and marred, and basically saying that if you're not in there with me, if you're not the one that's making yourself vulnerable, I don't want to hear it. If you know neither defeat nor victory, if you've never tasted that, if you've never put yourself in a situation of uncertainty, and I'm sure in his case back in the day, it was like life or death. If you've never put yourself in that situation, then you don't get to talk. I only care about the opinions of the man in the arena. And so that I love. She talks about not taking in the advice from the cheap seats, right? Like, cool, you're there. You're just judging. You have no say. You can't relate. You're not in this with me. So I don't care. And so that's a huge pivot that I've helped a lot of clients make in terms of the very act of signing up for a tournament is scary, right? The very act of like looking at who's in your division, getting to the venue, having to make weight, sitting in a bullpen with your opponents, you know, and you're like, I think that's her. I think, oh my God, she looks so much bigger than I thought she was, right? Like all of the self-doubt, you know, and then possibly getting injured, right? Like that's a huge one. Someone's trying to freaking kill you. Like some people do fight like life or death. So there's so much vulnerability in just everything that we do in jiu-jitsu. And you do it so often that it goes unnoticed.
Yeah. And it is, you could stay on the sidelines where you're safe, but where is the growth in that?
Right. Like where's the challenge? And I mean, there is challenge in just training, right? So like when I found jiu-jitsu from a tournament. So like the first time I ever saw it was at the Pan Am's 2008. I just happened to be spoiled, you know, live in California. I'd be like, oh yeah, let's just go down there and see. So it was like, oh, so this is what people do. They train and they compete. They train to compete. And then you go and you sign up at a gym and most of the people don't compete. In fact, there's full gyms of people that don't compete. And they still are good. They still, you know, we all know people who are way better in the gym than they are in the competitions, like me, you know. But so it's like, you know, what are you truly missing? And it's like, well, the opportunity to put yourself in a situation where you have no idea what's going to happen. Right? That's the fear. But at the same time, and this is what I bring up to my clients, I'm like, look, if it was like WWE and it was predetermined who was going to win, that wouldn't be very fun. That wouldn't be very exciting, right? So as much as you are nervous about the outcome, there's still a level of excitement of like, you can change that to, instead of, oh my God, what's going to happen, to, I can't wait to see what's going to happen, and then reframing, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that reframe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also, some people don't compete just because they have no interest in it. And I think there's a lot of confidence in knowing yourself and just saying, I love jujitsu and I love training and I love bettering myself, but I don't need to go out and compete to feel like I am a jujitsu
Mm-hmm.
practitioner.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that, okay, so there's this self-determination theory about being self-motivated, and there's 3 psychological needs, and competence is one of those. So I think most people, they say, because I've had people come to me and say, I don't really compete, but I'm getting my belt soon, my next belt, and I want to feel like I've earned it. I want to feel like I deserve it. I want to feel like in the general consensus of all the purple belts around the world, I want to be like, okay, that's a purple belt, right? And that's just a feeling,
Yeah.
because there's really no standard, right? There's a little bit, but not really, right? It's really just up to your coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have control over whether you get promoted, but at the same time, like, competing gives you an option to say, I tried and I put myself out there and I wanted to see how I did. But
Mm-hmm.
you also have the opportunity to build competence in the gym. Because if someone says, you're really good at that's verbal persuasion. That's like, yes, okay, cool. That means that I'm actually good at something. There's validation from someone else. Or you don't even need verbal validation. You tap somebody, right? And of course, there's people who are like, oh, if I tap them, it's because they gave it to me, right? They minimize. And that's a whole nother, mindset or mental block. But being able to say, like, yeah, it works, or self-improvement, meaning I couldn't do a hip escape. Now I'm doing it to defend my guard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, there's a lot of self-improvement aspects. And if you have a good environment, if you have a good coach, a good gym, good training partners, that feedback is powerful. Like, it's really an opportunity for people to build that. And that's, I think, why people don't feel the need to compete. There's fear, absolutely. Fear of humiliation, fear of losing, fear of injury. And most people, it's injury, right? Because they're
Yeah.
like, look, I got a full-time job, right? Like, how many people do you train with? They're like, please don't pull on my fingers. I need to type tomorrow. Or like,
Mm-hmm.
we had a woman who was actually training to be a surgeon. And like, while she was training with us, she like got like her dream job and all this stuff. But she was always very adamant, like, don't fuck up my fingers. Like, I really need my fingers, And of course, some people are going to be like, why did you choose this then? And it's like, whatever. There was a guy actually who played guitar, and his guitar teacher was like, stop cutting your nails. Your nails actually are great for picking, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would wear a glove
Oh my
just so
God.
that he could live both lives. So he wouldn't scratch the living hell out of us with his
Yeah.
nails, and he could keep his nails on that one hand. It was really weird, but we were like, go for it, dude. So there are, like, I don't believe that jiu-jitsu is for everyone, but I do believe that, like, you could find something for everybody. There's different reasons. People come from all different walks of life. They have different reasons for doing what they do. But they all have those basic needs of needing to feel like they belong and needing to feel like they're good at something. That's just super, super basic, that anybody needs to feel empowered to achieve goals.
Yeah. We all have our why.
Yeah, it's super important.
Yes. So, in some ways, I think both in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and in the outside world, there has been progress in mental health and diminishing the stigma, but I don't think we're fully there yet. But what progress have you seen, and what do you think still needs to change?
I think it's a little bit less scripted on social media, because before it used to be, didn't get the result I wanted. And then it was just like, I'll go back to the drawing board and train for another. Meanwhile, they're just fucking devastated, right? So one of the examples would be Brianna St. Marie.
Yeah.
After ADCC 2022, 2022, she, I guess, felt so shitty and so like embarrassed, didn't even want to show her face. And this is what she wrote in an Instagram post after this year's ADCC, where she narrowly missed the gold. And so for her, you know, most people from the outside would be like, you just got 2 silver medals at ADCC. Like, you're one of the best, you know? But for her, she came short. She came short of her goal. And she has her own self-presentation and self-concept of how she feels about herself. But to her, because the jiu-jitsu scene is so focused on outcome and results, right? She felt the need to explain. And I love it because it was vulnerability. It was saying, yeah, even I struggle because this is something that is really hard to do and to compete at that level and to deal with loss. And nobody wants to be the sore loser. Nobody wants to make excuses. Nobody wants to be the guy that's like, yeah, like I didn't win because like I was feeling sad or whatever, because we're always worried about like what people are going to think of us, you know? And to an extent, it matters, because if you have a sponsor and your sponsor wants you to win, that's a pressure, right? If you've won before and now all these like journalists are writing about you and interviewing you and telling you like that you're going to win, right? That you have everything you can to win, like that puts pressure. Past performances, like she could have easily been in backstage going, just don't fuck it up, just don't fuck it up, which is the worst, because then all you end up doing is fucking it up, right? It's like, don't think of a pink elephant, you're going to think of a pink elephant. So to me, I think that there's been a huge jump, mostly in the females, of like being able to talk and be supported, be able to share your inner thoughts and have people actually like look at you as, wow, you're human. You're not just some athlete who doesn't have feelings or who doesn't deal with the things that everybody else deals with. You're still very much human. And I would also say, like, it's more like people are using the words more, because that was never a thing, right? Mental illness, mental health. People weren't talking about that. And so now people are like, this was my goal, is to have people really value mental health just as much as they do physical health. Of course, it's like, you know, we're in a sport where people don't even want to go to the doctor. They're just like, nah, dude, I'll just ice it and train more, right? Like there's some stupid shit going on. But if I could tell someone that talking about your feelings is actually going to help you, then maybe if they have a safe space to do so, then they'll benefit from it, right? But creating safe spaces, I've found, is mostly a female thing, which I'm not mad about, because, you know, I'm female. But, you know, for men too, it's a big important thing. So I'd say way more strides in the feminine world rather than the men. But there are some people talking about it. But you also have some men like Gordon Ryan who are still saying that, spewing bullshit.
Yeah. It's, as a woman who loves men, it makes me sad that men don't necessarily feel as safe being vulnerable. And I think it's negatively affected past relationships I've had, because you're dealing with somebody who doesn't even know, you know what their issue is, but they aren't there yet.
Yeah, they don't have the tools. I mean,
yeah.
There was something my mentor said to me when I said, yeah, so I do mental skills training and I meet the person where they're at. And I may be, you know, the person who knows the most about sports psychology, but you know the most about you. And she was like, that's not necessarily true. And I was like, what do you mean? Aren't you supposed to be like the expert on yourself, you know? She goes, well, some people were not gifted those tools. Some people don't have those self-awareness skills. So like, you really are meeting someone where they're at. Like they don't know what emotions are. Like I bring out the emotions wheel, and even people who intellectualize their emotions rather than feel their emotions. Like, so my own therapist has brought it out for me, and it's really helpful because you start out with like angry, fearful, surprised, happy, sad. And then because those are the vague ones, right?
Yeah.
Someone can usually someone can distinguish between being mad, sad, and happy, right? And then it just gets a little more nuanced. And then it goes out one more time in the third, is a little bit more specific, because there's a difference between being exhilarated and being excited.
Yeah.
And everybody is going to experience it differently. Like when I'm happy, like I'm happy, like I will verbalize it. I will tell people, like, you will know. Other people, they're like, yeah, I'm happy. It's just like this contentment for them.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's going to experience it differently. Like if I were to ask you, okay, when you're in a triangle and you feel like you need to tap, what are the signs for you to tap? Some people might say like, oh, I just feel it tight and I just let go, I tap. Or I start feeling like I can't breathe. Okay, cool. That's my tap. Mine is like the eyes. I feel like the lights are going out, So
Yeah.
everyone's going to experience it differently, but a lot of people assume that everybody feels the same. So they're like, well, whatever. I'm not going to add anything new. And it's like everybody's subjective experience is different. The
Mm-hmm.
billions of people that spent this past 24 hours all spent it differently. They experience different things, even if they were in the same room, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of research on siblings who grow up with very different mindsets despite being under the same circumstances, being raised under the same circumstances, the same household, the same parents. So people are unique. And I think that there's a lot of like, oh, humility, oh, leave your ego at the door. And it prevents people from thinking that their thoughts matter and that their feelings matter. And they do,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not in the clinical world. So if like someone says I'm dealing with depression and anxiety and stuff, doesn't mean that I'm like, well, I'm out. Like, let me just send you to someone else. But ethically, I have to refer. But oftentimes my clients also have therapists that they work with. So I don't need to refer and I can continue working with them. But I always bring it back to performance. So, but I need to know if your boyfriend broke up with you because you're about to fight the world and that matters, right? Like,
Yeah.
but of course, someone in that position would be like, oh, no. Like, no one wants to hear that I got broken up with and I'm sad and that's why I can't do worlds. Or my coach doesn't understand how upset I am and how it's affecting me and I can't go train or whatever it is. But we're not just and that's what I mean by leaving your ego off the mat or like leaving all your problems off the mat. Like, yeah, for some people, it's a safe haven and it's a haven to not have to think about those things. But some people can't. They can't take out all of that and it's going to be affected. You're human, right? Like you have, emotions and your emotions are going to affect you no matter what.
Mm-hmm. We're not robots.
Honestly, like there were times I wish I was, like I wish I could just like oil my joints, and just get back in there, but then it's like you hit 30 and you're like, oh, okay. I guess I'll rest.
And then 35 and it's even worse.
I just hit 35. I'm still figuring that out. It's crazy. But, you learn like recovery things that are like, okay, I know that this is going to hurt. So I'm going to take a pre-Advil. I'm going to take a pre-Advil. I'm going to make sure that I have my heating pad. I'm going to have this. I'm going to have this. So you kind of figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in what ways has Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu helped your mental health? And then in what ways has it affected your mental health?
Yeah, that I could just write a book on. Okay, to keep it simple, I would say that it gave me a place that I felt I belonged, that we're all weirdos, we're basically LARPing. We're doing like, one of my clients said is combat drag, which I love.
That too.
Yeah. Right. Because it's like, yeah, we put on our little uniforms and then we go do our little play murder and then we go home,
Yeah.
So I would say that part, like when I talk about like those basic psychological needs, like autonomy, relatedness, and competence, right? So competence, like you get to see, like it's instant gratification, right? Like if you've got that armbar, you've got that armbar, right? If you're stuck in an armbar, you're stuck in an armbar. Like if you make a decision and that wasn't the good one, you're going to find out real fast that was not a good decision, right? And that's the beauty of it, that you get to tap and go again and LARP again. But being able to also choose what you do. So like, yeah, you learn a lot of different moves, but you get to learn about your body. So I'm really flexible. I learned that I was like super flexible and how to use it. Like overhead sweeps was really easy because my feet can like touch my head, and going inverted and certain things, like learning about myself. That was great because it gave me that like feeling of like, wow, I can make a difference. I can make a difference. These little hands can do things and make a difference. But I would say where it harmed me was, so we have an unregulated sport, right? So we don't have anywhere to report abuse to. We don't have regulations in terms of, are these people criminals, right? Like, is anyone doing background checks on these instructors? Probably not, right? There's no ethics. There are no ethics. There are traditions. There's like Bushido, but there's no ethics. And so that is where people say things that hurt others and it goes unnoticed. There's borderline abusive coaching that is very, very prevalent. More so, I'd say in MMA. That was where I definitely had a lot of abuse, but not having the resources and support of a normal sport, right? Of an organized sport. So normally you have multiple stakeholders, right? So if it's an Olympic sport, you have the IOC, the Olympic Committee. You've got Safe Sport. You've got, if it's NCAA, if it's your local high school, right? You've got the school administration. So if something were to happen, you go to the school administration. They'd probably, do something, hopefully. So there's checks and balances. Jiu-jitsu, there's no checks and balances. The only organization that we've looked at as like an overarching organization is the IBJJF, and they're a for-profit company. They're not looking out for our safety. They say they do. They say, but there's not a lot of proof of action behind it. And so there's a real lack. And so for me, especially like the mental health issues, I was made to feel like I was fucked up, like I was wrong, or like you don't really get a lot of support when you lose, because at those big gyms, they really only care about the ones that win. And while they do care about you as a person, there's a lot of students, right? And if you're going to carry the name, then that's what they want. They want outcome. And so if you're giving inconsistent results, then you feel a lot of shame. So for me, I think I did a lot of things that weren't true to what I needed. I didn't know how to live within my values. I didn't know how to stand up for myself necessarily until the later years. And so it's basically, for my mental health, you can get into the wrong crowd. You can put your self-worth into your performances, which is what I did. So when I lost or I didn't make it to the podium, it was like I was never there. And now all of the 3 months that I spent training and doing everything I could and putting everything on my credit card to like pay for it, like strength and conditioning coaches and diet and everything else to make it happen. Like there's no payoff, literal and figuratively. There's no payoff. So that's the hardest part. Dedicating your life to a sport that nobody cares about or knows about is hard. And the abuse of authority, right? You can't really consent to things when there's an unequal, right, power. And there's a lot of power that black belts have. And so being in that position now, I think like I've done wonders, I hope, to help people realize that like just because someone's a black belt doesn't mean they're a good person. I've said that for a long time, and I don't allow people to call me professor. It becomes a joke, so then everybody else calls me professor to piss me off. But I don't like the inherent hierarchy and structure, because it is a breeding ground for abuse and grooming, and it's very innocuous. Like, let's say I get my blue belt, right? You just got your blue belt. What do you say when you tell someone about your rank? Like, what's the sentence we use when someone says, "Oh, you do jiu-jitsu"? Like, what rank are you?
Oh, you say I'm a blue belt.
Yeah. Do you see what you said though? You didn't say I have a blue belt. You didn't say I earned a blue belt. You didn't say I wear a blue belt. You say I am a blue belt, right? I am a black belt.
That.
Yep. So back in the day when I was like 21-year-old, whatever, and be, going out and hanging out and going to lunch with like my training partners, it would be very like simple, where they'd be like, "Oh, shotgun, I'm a purple belt. You're a blue belt. Haha. I pull rank." Right?
Yeah.
And that's scary shit, because now you've got people doing things for you off of the mats where like it's not a thing. It's not a thing. And like there were some, I won't name names, but like people who were treating themselves as if they were Michael Jordan and acting as if like they were famous. And it's like, you're famous in a sport that no one knows about, like simmer down now. like, get your ego in check, because like, yeah, cool, you can rule the world, whatever, you can fuck any woman, any white belt, that whatever, because you're hot and you win stuff, whatever. But like, I mean, I fell for it, we all do, right? But at the same time, it's like, it's ridiculous how easy it is for someone to say like, well, I'm a black belt, you have to do what I say. And that becomes a very scary thing, right?
It sure does. And it's, I did no research when I chose my gym. I got very lucky because I found out after I was already very sucked into jujitsu that there is this part of the world, that is very, there are predators who take advantage of. It starts as showing respect. It starts with you bow when you get on the mat, you bow to your teacher, your professor,
bow to the old dead people on the wall.
Yeah. And the respect part of it is really beautiful, but then there are people who take that respect and twist it. And it's something people, especially women getting into the sport, just need to be aware of and have the information out there to do their research.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was like, I'll do whatever. I want this. I want to be a world champion. Like, what do I need to do? Like, how high do I jump? Right.
Yeah.
And there were things that I did that like probably didn't have to do. And I was taken advantage of, and not just because I was a female, but just because I was eager. I was very eager. Like, who can tell me how to be good at this shit? I want to be good. I want to be up on that podium. I want to be teaching all the seminars. I want people to be getting pictures with me. I want to make a mark on the sport. I want to feel like myself, my authentic self can not only be good at something, but have an expression and inspire people. And like, this was like a platform, but that platform can be used for good or bad. And it's crazy how, I mean, I have had situations in the past where rape was happening under my nose and I didn't know. And it was one of the worst feelings, because here I am, like, big female advocate, like, take up space, use your voice, right? Consent, consent, consent. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's that inconspicuous.
It is. And people behave in ways, and they hide it. There's always the people when someone gets exposed that say, oh, I knew all along and there was always something weird about them. Maybe sometimes that's the case. I've been in situations where I've been shocked as hell by somebody that I liked as a person. This is even outside of jiu-jitsu. Like, they surprised the hell out of me with who they really were, based on the face they gave me was a mess, and it can be.
Absolutely. And it's a real good face when you walk around with the black belt on, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because, in jiu-jitsu, it takes 8 to 10 years to get, I got mine at 8, like that. It's a long-term dedication, and it's supposed to permeate your life. Like, be a black belt on and off the mat. Jiu-jitsu is for everyone. And it's just that because it's unregulated, because there's no one looking out for you, if you don't have one of those gyms that you're lucky to be in a good, place, it's hard, especially for people who want to show respect, who are eager. I mean, it's kind of like men in uniforms, right? Like, men in uniforms. It's like, I've been taught, like, our whole culture, like, you look at like anything from like Coco Melon to like all of those kids shows, right? Like, even like Sesame Street, like, cops are always seen as good. It's always like easy, right? Oh, that's a bad guy. That guy, he's a bad guy. Oh, that guy, he's a good guy. And it just gets so fucked up, because you think like the people who have been in this the longest, the people that have seen transformations of their students and run successful businesses, and they are like out there, they're like people of their community, and then they're doing horrible things. And it's what, unfortunately, it's the people that are usually too good to be true that are hiding something. And so I myself am very like protective, and I'm lucky to have the skills that I do. A lot of jiu-jitsu for me is autonomous. I've been doing it for so long, and I can keep myself safe. when if a guy is like, oh yeah, it's a black belt, I could finally beat a black belt, and go hard on me. But I'm still very protective. I will, even though I know even if I know someone, if I see them, I'm like, I'm going to wait to see how they roll with other people, because maybe I don't want to have that conversation tonight. Maybe I just don't want to see this other side of someone when they seem like really cool. And then they're just like aggressive beast, on the mat. Like it's hard.
It is. Yeah.
So it's a lot of and that's why I don't have a gym. That's like the biggest reason I don't have a gym, is because I don't want to manage all of those personalities. And I'm a big proponent of not just physical safety, right? Physical safety, obviously, we cannot strive if we don't feel safe, but the psychological safety of feeling like, if you're in an uncomfortable position, if you feel like there's something that's not right, but you feel like you're going to have consequence for speaking up, right? Like, imagine if you're like, this doesn't feel right, the way it's like pinching me or whatever, and the black belt goes, you're obviously not doing it right, but like not being able to say, hey, this is making me uncomfortable, or being able to, use your words. And there's a lot of ways that people aren't able to speak up in this community because of that hierarchy. And a lot of people will put themselves down. Like, I have a Discord channel for BJJ mental models, which is like my business, Train Your Mind. And I asked people, I said, why is it so hard to lose to people that are lower belt than you? And it's like, you stand in line and you're like, I'm supposed to beat all those people, and I'm supposed to not beat those people. So if you beat these people, you're like, I suck. Even though some guy might be a wrestler for 10 years before he started and he's wearing a white belt, right? Or someone's stronger than you, or someone just better, or someone picked up a move better, or whatever. Or you go and you're like, wow, I just passed that purple belt's guard. They obviously gave it to me, right? And you start minimizing and you start thinking like, well, I don't deserve that. So what we attribute those things to is heavily, heavily influenced by that hierarchy. Like, I'm not supposed to beat people above me, and I'm supposed to beat people that are, below me. And it gets to be very rigid, and that gets in the way of that competence when they start feeling like I suck,
Yeah, I think it also gets in the way of progress too. As a newer blue belt, like sometimes I have to remind myself, like, roll with the white belt, risk getting tapped, because use that roll to learn something or to work on something.
It's hard because the way that I see it, like I have a client, she was saying like, yeah, so I rolled with this girl who had 4 stripes on her blue belt and I only have 2 stripes. So I figured I could learn something from her. And I was like, it's funny that you say that, because stripes don't mean shit. Stripes are subjective, right? Like, doesn't mean that someone can teach you something that they do. It doesn't mean that they're good. It doesn't mean that they win. It's just subjective. And the hard part is that, imagine if every grade of yours, like in school, for every test was posted, like the results of a play audition. Like, did I get the part kind of thing? That's to me what it can feel like for some people who are very sensitive to like, and that believe in the system so hard and so, so strictly that they think like, oh, well, 3 stripes is better than 2 stripes, so they're better than me. When really, and that's why I like no-gi so much more now, it's like, it's not about the rank, because some people are really good at some things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and when they get it on you, it's easy to be like, you got me, then be like, oh, you shouldn't get me, and oh, fuck, I gotta fuck them up the next time. Like, it doesn't serve you to be motivated by beating others, even though it's a very good indication of competence. So it's a very complicated, because we do have to compare to others necessarily, right? But that's why we don't go with one roll, right? One tournament doesn't say I'm good, I'm bad. One roll doesn't determine anything. You really have to zoom out and go, okay, over time, have I gotten generally better at defending triangles? Have I gotten generally better at defending my guard or going after submissions, right? Like, this game is complex. So being able to judge like how good you're doing based on just how others roll with you is not the biggest indicator. It's kind of like a overall thing.
What lessons would you impart on others based on your experiences in jiu-jitsu?
Use your words. I know it sounds really silly, but a lot of the times there are a lot of like there's like oaths. We say oaths all the time, or you slap and bump, right? Like that's consent.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like nonverbal things. But with people, because of that hierarchy, they don't think that they could speak up when things are uncomfortable. Let's say someone is like, you're an uke for someone and they're like cranking your neck, like you're all about, like you're like about to go out, right? And you're trying to be a good uke. You're trying to just do the right thing. You're trying to be, trying to make sure people are seeing everything well. But now you're going out. And what do? Do you say something or do you just fucking go out? Right? Like, do you want to be the guy that's like, hey, like you're bothered, like you're going to, whatever, like you're hurting me or whatever, because people are assuming that other people are going to think they're weak or that, like, oh, you're not being a good training partner or whatever. And it's really, we're managing a lot of different personalities, different cultures, different way that people were raised, different socioeconomic status, right? It's like there are all these walks of life. So be direct, tell people what you need. It's okay to say no to someone, right? It's okay if someone says no to you. You don't need to know the reason, although I'm sure you'll probably think of one because that's what our brain does. But it's definitely being able to speak up for yourself, even if you are a white belt, because you're a human being and everyone has value.
I agree wholeheartedly. That is a great sentiment and a really good statement to kind of encapsulate our conversation. Erin, thank you so much for spending your time talking with me about jiu-jitsu, mental health. Again, really, really respect the work you do with both Submit the Stigma and just in general as an advocate for mental health. It's helped me in my journey. So
good.
Just say that.
Good. And you're gonna help someone else, right? Like that's how it works, like I share my story, makes you feel empowered to share your story. Someone hears the story and goes, oh my gosh, like I have a similar story. And that's how it happens, right? Like we all become advocates simply just by speaking about our own experiences. And that's it. That's just sharing the vulnerability and allowing yourself to be seen.
Yeah, it's the whole goal of this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're doing great things. So keep it up.
Well, thank you, Erin. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Erin. She is delightful, just so kind, smart, passionate. I really enjoyed talking to her. And if you'd like to learn more about Train Your Mind or Submit the Stigma, they're both on Instagram at Submit the Stigma and at Train Your Mind. I'll also drop some links in the show notes. And this week, I want to leave you with a little homework, if you will. Think about ways in which you take care of your own mental health. You engage in self-care and maybe talk about it with somebody close. You can DM me, send me an email if you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody in your life about it. And I'll share with you the things that I do. A big one, I think, if you watch my videos, there's always animals running amok in the background. I've got 2 dogs and a cat that I love to cuddle. I train jiu-jitsu. I used to do a lot of yoga. Haven't done as much lately, but that definitely helps me. Yes, Goose, I am talking about you. I read my tarot cards. I go to bookstores. I burn incense and candles. I sit in the hot tub. And I watch comfort shows. So those are just a few things I do to take care of my mental health. So let me know what you do. Until we meet again. Later, babes. Bye.